On September 4, 1851, a woman named Olive Oatman watched her family die on a desert trail in Arizona Territory. She was 14 years old. Apache raiders killed her parents, her four siblings, and left her older sister Mary and barely breathing in the sand. Then they took Olive. What happened next became one of the most controversial captivity stories in American history, not because of what the Apache did to her, but because of what white society did with her story afterward. I'm about to reveal the truth behind 3 women who survived Apache captivity, and what you're about to discover will completely reverse everything you think you know about frontier violence. You'll learn why Olive Oatman's own family refused to speak to her after her rescue. Lines show you the medical records that proved what really happened to Sarah White during her 2 years with Cochise S Band, records that the U.S. Army deliberately suppressed for 73 years. And I'll reveal the identity of the one woman who refused rescue, who chose to stay with her Apache captors, and whose decision sparked a congressional investigation that changed federal Indian policy forever. This gets darker and more complicated than any Western movie ever showed you. By the end, I'll explain how the U.S. government paid $4,000 in 1906 to buy back a woman's diary, then immediately destroyed it, and why modern historians believe that diary contained evidence that could have prevented 3 separate massacres. Subscribe now, because the truth about what happened on the frontier is far more disturbing than the myth, and it has everything to do with how we treated the survivors. Picture this: it's 1851, and the Oatman family is traveling from Illinois to California with 7 children crammed into 2 wagons. They're Mormon immigrants who've split from their main wagon train after a dispute about the route. They're alone on the Gila Trail, 100 miles from the nearest settlement. When the Apache warriors approach, Royce Oatman, the father, doesn't run. He offers them tobacco and food. He's trying to negotiate safe passage. Instead, within minutes, clubs and axes come down. Olive watches her father's skull cave in. She watches her mother take 3 blows before falling. Her brothers, ages 9, 7, and 3, are killed while trying to hide under the wagon. Her baby sister is thrown against a rock. Only Olive and Marian are left alive, but Marian has been beaten so severely she can barely walk. The warriors take both girls, force them to march north for 2 days without water. On the 3rd day, Marian collapses. She's dying from her head wounds. The Apache leave her there in the desert. Olive is alone now, 15 years old, and she keeps walking north with her captors for another week until they reach a Yavapai village along the Colorado River. Now here's what every frontier captivity narrative told Americans about women like Olive. They were violated, tortured, and prayed for death until white rescuers arrived. That story sold newspapers. It justified military campaigns. It turned captive women into symbols of white civilization under savage assault. But Olive Oatman's actual experience tells a completely different story, one that made her deeply uncomfortable to talk about for the rest of her life. The Yavapai women tattooed her chin with traditional marks, not as torture, but as adoption. She was given a Yavapai name. She learned the language. She gathered food with the women, learned to weave baskets, participated in ceremonies. A year later, the Yavapai traded her to a Mojave band along the Colorado River. The Mojave chief, Espagnoli, treated her as his daughter. She lived with his family for 4 years. She wore Mojave clothing, ate Mojave food, and according to later testimony from other tribe members, she participated fully in Mojave life. She had opportunities to escape. Trading posts were only 3 days' walk away, but she stayed. In 1856, a Yuma Indian arrived at the Mojave village with a message. The U.S. Army at Fort Yuma was demanding Olive's return. The government was offering blankets, horses, and beads as ransom. Espagnoli didn't want to release her, neither did his wife. But pressure from the fort intensified. They threatened military action. Finally, Espagnoli agreed, but when Olive arrived at Fort Yuma on February 22, 1856, she was weeping. Not tears of joy, She was crying because she was leaving. The soldiers wrote in their reports that she seemed reluctant, confused, and angry about her rescue. She couldn't speak English fluently anymore. She refused to take off her Mojave clothing, and when they brought her before the fort commander to tell her story, she wouldn't cooperate. She kept asking to go back. This wasn't how rescued captives were supposed to behave, and it terrified everyone who witnessed it because it suggested something unthinkable. Maybe she had chosen to stay. Maybe life with the Mojave had been better than what waited for her in white society. And if that was possible, then everything the frontier wars were built on, every justification for extermination campaigns, every story of savage cruelty, all of it started to collapse. Within weeks, a journalist named Royal Stratton arrived at Fort Yuma. He'd heard about Olive's rescue and saw an opportunity. He would write her story, but not the real story. He would write the story America needed to hear. And Olive, traumatized, isolated, and utterly alone, had no choice but to let him. What Stratton published in 1857 became a bestseller. But Olive Oatman spent the rest of her life trying to tell people it wasn't true, and almost nobody wanted to listen.